Hey everyone, my name is Patrick, and welcome to the Undignified Podcast, where we talk about worship, the church, and everything in between. Now, I'm really excited about today's conversation because we're talking with a professional music director. Now, what is a music director? We're going to get into that, but music directors are not a new thing. Music directors have been around for a really long time. Broadway shows, live bands, all sorts of musical settings and musical situations use a music director. It's their role to kind of be that extra piece of tape holding everything musical together and providing clarity to the team, to the band, to the show, to the orchestra, to the album recording, whatever the case may be. So I decided to have a conversation with my friend, Brett Pontecorvo. You're gonna meet him in a minute, but he's a professional musical director in all sorts of settings, including the worship team that I'm a part of, that I lead every single Sunday here in New York City. So without further ado, I wanna introduce you to Brett, but don't forget that down in the show notes, you're gonna find links to all sorts of helpful things, things that we talk about today, or things that are gonna help your worship leading journey. Thanks for joining the Undignified Podcast. Let's get to it. I am here with my good friend, Brett Pontecorvo, who I have known for many years, to talk all about what it means to be a music director, specifically for our context, on or in a worship team. Brett, how are you doing, man?
Doing good. Really happy to be here. It's cool. I don't get to talk too much about this often. I talk about a lot of stuff, but not about this. So I'm pretty excited for it.
It's happening right now. Well, I really do want to get into the meat of our conversation. I want to really dive deep into this, or as deep as we want. But first, can you just give a real just give us a picture of, what you do, what you're passionate about, what your life looks like right now, so people can just kind of get to know you a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So I guess I'm a musician by trade. It's like what I've kind of done my whole life. And mostly piano, all sorts of musical direction stuff for a while, doing show tunes and orchestration and that kind of thing. And then kind of pivoted. I run a YouTube channel called Live Keyboardist, which kind of deals with the back end of this. Maybe we'll get into a little bit of it, but kind of how do you actually do the keyboard stuff that you need to do to make it function live and kind of get the sounds that you need. Yep. Then I work with Gig Performer, which is kind of like live performance software similar to Ableton or MainStage, and teach jazz, teach piano lessons. So all music stuff. And then at our church, help run the prayer team and have been on the worship team for a really long time, which has been quite a journey. We've been together since I was
Yes.
Have we hit 10 years, Patrick?
We're about 9 years in to working together in a worship set, or just knowing each other, which immediately we knew each other because we started leading worship together.
Yeah.
Which I actually want to talk about that a little bit, but I also know you're a dad.
Yes. I'm a dad.
You're a dad. You're a husband.
Yeah.
You're all those things. What is one thing you're loving right now about being a dad?
Oh, man. I guess I love everything about being a dad. It feels to me like it's
Wow.
probably the most meaningful thing that I have ever gotten to do. We could go down this whole rabbit hole, but I'm I think just in terms of what I'm seeing with people my own age, and I'm men in this generation of people need strong leadership. They desire strong leadership. And so having an opportunity to be a father and all of that stuff, but really to train young men, and my son's, 19 months old, but having an opportunity to set him up for success and have the type of strong leadership where he can then become a leader. 'Cause strong leadership changes things and it changes people. It changes, organizations. So it feels to me there's nothing more meaningful that I've ever gotten to set my hand to than being a dad. And also I'm having fun.
This is a whole different podcast. Which I love. And Yeah. So every morning, Shua, your son, wakes up and you what do you guys what's that leadership look like? You go over investment banking.
You know,
do you do like physical training?
Yeah.
Do you make him, the day can't start until he pins you for a count of 3 or something like that?
that's correct. Then we move right into archery training.
There are some guys out there that are hearing this. Well, of the 5 people that listen to this, there's one of them that's a dude that's like, yes, this guy gets it. We are completely joking.
Yeah.
So you're a dad, you're a musician, you've got everything going on in your life. There's actually, you live in an apartment. I live in an apartment. We're in New York City. There's people in my building and neighbors I have and friends that also take lessons from you. A lot of those lessons are virtual. So you're in software, you're in hardware, you're a teacher, you're all these things. And you're also a valuable part of our worship team. You've got a lot going on, man. And I have to say that you do it all really well. So I'm excited to talk to you today about music direction because, again, it's something that you have really taken a hold of, learned a lot about. I think we've learned a lot about it together. And I think some of the things we have learned can help other teams out there. So I guess my first question for you is like, actually, let me start this way. Let's actually start with how we met.
Okay. Yeah. Great. How did we meet, Patrick?
Okay. Well, I moved to New York to start churches. Eventually we planted a bunch of churches. I was working in 2 of them, part-time in each. And then your pastor was pastoring one of the churches that was a part of this network of churches. And he said, Patrick, stop being part-time 2 places. Come work at our church full-time. And I show up and he tells me, I've got 2 worship leaders that are going to work underneath you. One of them quit immediately. Before I got there, it had nothing to do with me. One of them quit immediately. The other got deported. But before those things happened, they walked me through the team and, they said, there's this person that sings and this person that plays, and this is what the team looks like. And, there's this guy named Brett and he plays every week and he also sets up and he also tears down. And I've told you this before. I looked them without ever meeting you. I looked them straight in the face and said, that changes immediately. This kid is going to burn out. What are we doing? I don't care how talented he is. But fast forward, since you played every week, my first week leading worship there, you were on the team, and immediately you had this obviously musical ability, but you also had this hunger for the Lord, this desire to see the team grow. You also have this like entrepreneurial spirit, which you can see from you teaching lessons, growing on YouTube, creating content, digging into hardware and software, and all those things kind of becoming your job. So when I learned that like, hey, we could do this whole music direction thing to help our team on a Sunday, I came to you and said, how would you feel about doing this? And you were just like, yeah, obviously we should do this. Now that's like a super condensed version of the story, but like, is there anything you would add or anything that I totally missed or I'm completely incorrect about?
I think that's right. I think having a musical director is helpful. Especially if you have somebody in your team that can work well with whoever's leading worship. I think it's a win all around, but it's also a journey. Yeah, and I think when you asked me, I was like, yeah, that makes sense. Because we had also hit kind of like a transitional point in the worship team where we had kind of outgrown the like grassroots church plant, like our drum set is a djembe, or maybe we don't have one, and and it was starting to be like, okay, what is the worship actually going to look like? Are we going to have a full band? Are we going to, revert back to pipe organ? Like it was kind of like we had to make a choice. And if we were going to go the route that we ended up going, then having musical direction made sense. And based on your skill set and the skill set of the team, making that choice made sense. So I was like, yeah, we have to do it. It would be a great idea.
And we also want to pause here and say, we love people who play the djembe. We love people who play the pipe organ. Brett is not trying to ostracize everyone. We know that Brett hates people that do that from his previous statement, but we at Undignified Worship Podcast, we love everybody. I'm totally kidding. I get what you're saying. Like those days where you show up and you're like, I don't know who's going to be on the team today. We had definitely outgrown that. And it was time to create some habits on our team not striving for perfection, but just striving for clarity and striving for good leadership, because that's what we're there to do as worship leaders. So I guess my first question on this topic for you is your description, your own words. What does an MD do? Not just in a worship setting, but just in general. What does a music director do in a live music setting?
Yeah, the music director brings clarity when people are trying to figure out what to do. And then depending on the capacity that the music director is leading, they're going to actually bring, strong decision making on everything. Or if they're leading in partnership with a worship leader, they're going to make sure that when the team is at a moment where we're trying to decide which way we're going to go, they're kind of like, this is what we're doing. Go here. So yeah, I think it's really like music director is making the musical decisions and delineating that information to the band. And then we just have to decide to what extent that is in the given context.
You have also done MDing, not just in a worship setting, but for like kids shows and musicals, which to me sounds terrible. It sounds horrific. It sounds stressful. Can you talk just like a little bit about the differences?
Yeah. So outside of a worship context, whether you're doing kids musicals or you're doing, musical theater or whatever it is, most of your decisions, 99% of your decisions are made before the first note is played. So, if I'm doing a musical with a full band and we've got, a small band, you're doing 6 pieces, but you've got some horn players, you've got, whatever. The charts are written, the people are there, and you have rehearsed exactly what you're going to do, and you're conducting it, and the show is timed down to the second, and your job is to make sure the train keeps going. When you're working with kids, it's kind of the same thing because kids are not going to handle you changing. So like the music has to be exactly the same. And so you're kind of pushing people towards like one thing. But when you're doing it in a worship context, especially if you're kind of leading with people who are brave leaders, brave worship leaders, your job is to steer the ship when you don't know what's about to happen. And that's where things get interesting because it's happening in the moment. So it's a very different experience where like the only way I can be prepared is to be the best possible musician that I can be. And obviously you have to know some songs, like you got to know the rep, but preparation is more about like your heart, your mind, your knowledge of overall repertoire than it is about like I have rehearsed this song and I know everything down to a T. Because in one moment, the worship leader steps up and says, if you feel so inclined, please raise your hands. And somebody in the back raises their hands and starts, yelling Jesus. And then all of a sudden, we're like the song has changed and the rest of the set list is gone,
I think there's like a joke on our team that I've heard said multiple times where it's like a vocalist or a musician will say, Patrick, are we singing this bridge in this song? And then I say, no. And then someone will laugh behind me because they know very well that when we play that live, there's a good chance we're gonna do that because we're able to make that decision on the fly. And one of the reasons why we're able to make that decision on the fly, and I'm allowed to be now. I come into a worship setting with a plan, but I'm allowed to be. What I was about to say is, I'm allowed to be a spirit-following worship leader because I have partners with me that are A, willing to follow. B, we've actually practiced that. So in rehearsals, we'll just sometimes completely play a different song. I, as the leader, will just go into a different song to kind of challenge our team to be ready for that. But one of the main tools we have is someone like you, someone like Chris, sometimes I am the MD, and I'm back there helping the band navigate what the worship leader is doing. Would you would you agree with all that?
Yeah. Just to make sure I'm fully with you, like, you're, I guess, kind of talking about like making sure the band can follow when the worship leader decides to go to the left or to the right. Is that correct? Having an MD helps navigate the spontaneity of those moments where you decide to play a different song, for sure.
I'm with you. Most of my music direction experience, I've only ever been a music director in a worship setting. But my first, or one of my first experiences with a music director. I wasn't even involved whatsoever. I used to work at the Apple Store in Soho and in New York, downtown New York, south of Houston. And we had this tiny little theater. And for some reason, the marketing team did not understand how small the theater was. And they would book these huge acts. Gnarls Barkley, Adele. They came and played small acoustic shows, but lines would be out the door.
Yeah.
Because they were all free. And while, a 75-year-old guy trying to learn how to use his iPhone for the very first time was sitting 10 feet away, you had hundreds of people listening to Gnarls Barkley sing the song Crazy.
Yeah.
Insane. And one time they booked the Jonas Brothers. And it was like Beatlemania. Now, you and I, as huge Jonas Brothers fans, we know all about them. No, not really. It was like in the height of their teen craze days. And there was a guy sitting off the stage with a little laptop and a microphone. And during setup, he walked in, threw his laptop down, opened it, and I think he had a Pro Tools session up, and he had a little microphone, and he was just talking into it, and people were looking back at him and nodding. And I was like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm the MD. I'm running all the backing tracks for the band, and I'm talking to them to make sure we don't miss any changes. And I was working part-time at Apple, but also a part-time worship leader at that point, and I was like, we are doing this at our church because it helps us. It basically is leadership within leadership that helps the team move forward. So it's, for me, music direction is a no-brainer. I think it helps teams. I think it provides clarity, and it's just an extra step of leadership that allows a worship team to whatever success looks like for your worship team. It helps that success come to fruition.
Yep, absolutely. And it can be to any degree that it makes sense for your church at the current moment. It can be having somebody in charge of running rehearsals. It can be having, it doesn't have to start, with the guy in the back with the laptop and the microphone, and that's certainly one way to do it, but there's such a spectrum of what could be helpful for your particular church in terms of having an MD.
So let's real quick talk about what that looks like.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about some of the nuances of musical direction, but before we talk about the nuances, I want to get into how do you prepare? What do you use? And let's just start there. How do you prepare as an MD? You're not necessarily leading the worship, but you are a leader on the team. So if I schedule you generally play keys. If I schedule you to play keys and I say, here we go, Brett, it's time to get going. And you look at the schedule and you see the worship leader that you are leading alongside. How do you, from that point, as detailed as you want to be or as simple as you want to be, how do you walk into that Sunday morning ready to go?
I guess the first thing is just, do you know the songs? Know your songs really well. So if there's a song I don't know, I have to listen to the song. For me, 90% of the time, that's more than enough. If I listen to a song, 6 or 7 times through, that's going to be fine. The reason that's fine is because we do use Planning Center, and there's going to be a PDF chart in front of me. And it's going to offboard some of the initial friction that comes with learning a new tune. Whereas if I was having to play a brand new tune from memory, I'd have to do a lot more reps through to make sure I got everything. And then just walking in, I think at this point, it's not a bunch extra. If you're leading and there's a new tune, I've spent extra time, and I'm going to know what time signature we're in, going to know what key signature we're in, and that's going to be just about fine. If there's some other worship leaders leading, there are times where I'll practice calling the tunes, which for somebody
Can you
who's
actually stop and say what that means?
Yeah. So letting people know where you're going next. So you might finish a chorus or whatever, and you'll say, let's sing that chorus again, or you call out the words to the next section so the band knows.
You will say?
Occasionally, depending on who I'm leading with, I practice doing it.
Depending on who you're leading with. So are there times where you are completely following the worship? Are you always following the worship leader and doing what they're doing? Or are there times where you are maybe with a more inexperienced worship leader or someone who just likes it? You are essentially calling the tunes for them and then allowing the worship leader, just to lead the people.
So if somebody's inexperienced, I want to give them the opportunity to really lead the band, because I think the best possible format is the worship leader mostly leads the band and the musical director supports the changes, especially dynamics or, if things need to be switched up or they go to a new song. Best case scenario. Second best case scenario is you have somebody who's really into worship, who's passionate about it, and they're not functionally able to give the band and the people direction and also lead well. And in that case, I'm in the microphone saying, verse 1, verse 2, we're going to, whatever it is. And usually I don't say that. Usually I'm calling actual lyrics. But in this moment, I've forgotten every worship song that I know. But, you're and what that does is that gives the worship leader some space to, lead the people well. But I would say our team as it stands right now is developed to the point where I'm not doing that as much as I used to, which is great. That's best case scenario. I forgot what the original question was, actually. Okay, yeah. So if you have to look at who you're leading with.
You're answering it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have to look at who are you leading with? Who are you playing with? I have to check and make sure that we have a bass player. Most of the time we do now, but sometimes we don't. And so I have to be ready to play bass. When you're leading, generally you've prepared some sort of tracks. So there's going to be something going on in our ears. But if we have somebody else who's leading, we're not going to have tracks. I need to be more familiar with the form of the tune. Context is everything, I think, is what I'm trying to say. Know the situation you're walking into. And this is just for Sunday morning. I mean, we could talk about walking into another place like, something smaller with a lot less tech is going to be the smaller you go, the more you as a human have to have spent time absorbing repertoire. Because you got to just have a long laundry list of tunes that are appropriate for what is happening in a room at any given moment. And then you have to, you need to know your numbered chords so that when you don't know a song, you can hear what's happening. And that sounds like lofty, but it's really, it's actually not at all lofty. Like there's such a small set of types of harmonies that are used, especially in CCM, that if you're very comfortable with, 1 5 6 4 and 6 4 1 5, or I don't know, then that's like half of your tunes. So it is achievable for most people, I would say, if you're able to play.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to interrupt you because you're already using like some inside language, which is good, and we want to hear. But there's someone here going, numbered chords, what does that even mean? So I think that you hit the nail on the head when you said context is key. You have to know what you're walking into. And when you said when the smaller you get, I'm assuming you mean like the smaller the team, the smaller the production value, the more prepared you need to be, right? Because with production value, which isn't the main thing, worshiping the Lord is the main thing. We all know that. But with production value comes tools. So you've already alluded to a couple of tools. Number one, if you're going to be a music director, you need to communicate with the people. So we use a talkback mic. If you've got an extra channel on your board, you give that to your music director. And that talkback mic only talks to the musicians. Now, there is our second piece of gear that we absolutely have to have, and that's in-ear monitors. Instead of speakers on the stage blasting the stage with the audio so that the musicians can hear themselves, you purchase an in-ear monitor system. Now, immediately people turn off the podcast because they think, oh, you want me to go spend thousands of dollars. The in-ear system we use at our church for how many? We normally have about 6 or 7 people playing on stage.
Yeah.
Is less than $1,000.
Yep.
It's quality budget conscious headphones, in ears that we provide for the band. It's extension cables to plug into little $30 boxes. And then those little $30 headphone amp boxes plug into through some routing and some cabling, plug into our audio system. So if you're sitting there thinking, oh, these guys want me to use in-ears and it's so costly, it can be. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. So you're back there behind your instrument, and let's say, and I'm kind of reiterating what you said. Forgive me, from a worship leader's perspective. I'm sitting there, and I begin to sing. You can just kind of, in my experience, feel what I'm doing. And you can, or maybe I even kind of give you like one of those worship leader looks, like a wink or I start to kick my leg, and you'll just lean into that MD mic and I'll hear you say things like, let's really drive it here. Or, all right, here comes the chorus. Or out in 3, 4, out. You also mentioned cueing chords. Which if you're playing a song, let's say in the key of G is 1, C is 4, E minor is 6, 5, the D chord is 5. So you're also, instead of leaning into your microphone and when I start to sing a chorus that we have not planned for and you know it in your head, you're not leaning in and saying G, E minor. You're not saying those things because you don't know who's capoing. You don't know if people have transposed. You're leaning into your mic and saying 1, 4, 6, 5. And we as a team, almost 100% of us know what that means depending on what key we are in. And all of that sounds extremely detailed. And my main thing as a worship leader and the guy who kind of said, we're going to do this, is you have to practice all of that. That's the main thing for me as the worship leader. You have to practice all of that. It's going to be really rough right at the beginning, or not, maybe not. And then it becomes easier and easier as the week go on. And now all of those things I just mentioned are a very regular part of our team's rhythm.
You also did a really good job in some of the earlier days, like making space for us to just fail.
Making what?
Making space for the team to fail. Like making space for us to just.
And by team, you mean making space for me personally to fail. Yep.
I mean,
get it. Got it. Yep.
Me also. Okay. There was the week, I tell this story on so many places, but there was one week that there was a very somber moment, and Jake, who was a pastor at the time, gets up on the stage and starts saying something, and I get on stage and, in-ears go in and I'm about to underscore, and I forgot to switch off a bass patch. And some combination of keys that I pressed when I was trying to play a chord caused the bass to do a reverse glissando. Boom! Up the G string, 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 which was just a horrible sound. And it just totally killed everything. Anyway, very embarrassing. But like at that point, we would get ready to come on stage and you would look at me and you'd say, Brett, think about what you're about to do before you do it. Which it sounds like in some ways like whatever, you hear that and you're like, wow, that's, very direct. But actually, like, you don't really have to rush. Like, take a moment to think what you're going to do and like realize that, yeah, it does take time to learn it. So like your team is going to do things wrong. Like we're growing as a church. I've heard you say in front of, a full congregation of people, well, this is a family moment. That didn't actually work the way it was supposed to. We're going to start over there. And then everything goes on and everyone is fine.
Yeah, I think we take ourselves way too seriously.
Yeah.
Now, there are certain churches you work in, certain organizations you work in where the leadership is very stringent on, I want this to be polished. I want this to be correct. All of that is fine. Having done this for so many years doesn't make me great. It just makes me old. But one thing over time that's been developed with the people who have been in leadership over me is trust. So one of the things I'm given is a long leash. And I have that long leash because I practiced really hard. And because I've practiced really hard, I've been able to not stress out. In the early years, if I made a mistake or my team made a mistake, massive stress for me. But now, instead of getting super stressed, I want to do well. But if we have a flub where you come up and essentially make a fart sound with your bass, I'm able just to lean into the mic and go, I love that you said that because I love doing that. I don't want to make it a regular thing, an every week thing, but leaning in and just going, oh man, family moment. Let's just continue to worship. It's so disarming, especially in our context, in a city that is so aggressive, that is so professional. It's so disarming to come into a space and for the thing, the people leading the thing you're there to be a part of, to make a pretty big blunder and just turn around and go, essentially, my bad, let's just keep going. Because that's real, that's normal, that's human. I think that's great. So what does it look like for you working with worship leaders and worship pastors? So you work with, on our team, we have Chris and Landry, we have Joseph, we have me, we have Jason, Amanda, all of these different worship leaders that you have worked with. What are some of the differences between a worship leader who really likes to drive the whole thing and you're basically supporting, and a worship leader who is saying like, okay, I guess it's time to start. And they're totally ready to lead the people in worship, but they lean on you to help lead the band. Do you have conversations with them beforehand? What does that process look like before you get on stage? And then what does it look like when you get on stage?
Well, so I guess I talk to everybody, and I know for most of, at this point, having worked with these people for a long time, I kind of know what's about to happen when I'm talking to them. So here's a great example. Like a couple on our team, Jason, Amanda, every time before they lead worship, I know I'm going to have key signatures and tempos, and I'm going to have them by Wednesday. I know they're going to be ridiculously rehearsed, and I know that when I show up, they are going to have opinions about what they want to hear. And they're also going to want my help. So I bring them up specifically because with them, I kind of just say, okay, I'm going to give very strong direction, but if they want something different, I'm going to back out, and they have final call during rehearsal. And then during performance, we're in service. I am going to have a final call. Unless they say something into the microphone, in which case the band's going to follow that because that's what the people heard.
So you said our friends Amanda and Jace, they prepare really well. So you come in knowing that they've got opinions and they've got ideas and they've got a plan. But then when you hit service time, gathering time, the countdown is done and you are playing, they are sticking to their plan. They're able to make changes with their voice, saying, let's sing that again. The cues in the ears are also saying chorus, verse. But you also know that if none of those things are happening, you have specific authority and ability to say, let's loop this chorus, or guys, let's come out here and just let Amanda sing, or something like that. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's funny talking through this too, because I'm like even thinking just about like, Jason and Amanda have been around for a really long time, just like how much they've grown and like how much less support they need now than 2 years ago, which is just wild. Somebody else who leads on our team, Jen, who's amazing and very brave in leadership, like will really just kind of, she'll be bold and brave and like really go where she feels like the Spirit's taking her. When we first started working together, I would call from the microphone the whole set, the whole thing. And now, not really at all, because she's able to really lead the band, which sometimes I wonder, like, is part of that growth because they've had the practice of being able to do it with the support. Like they were able to practice with a band, and they're hearing it. They're hearing in their ears when something needs to be called for everybody to follow, and they're feeling that experience, and then they're able to replicate that into a microphone because they've heard it so many times. I mean, there are a lot of factors, but I'm like, yeah, our worship leaders now are so skilled in comparison to 2, 3, 4 years ago, when they were also very good. But now there's kind of like this real assertive clarity that they have that makes it easy to follow. Again, I forgot the original question.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
Well, no, you're answering the original question because
Great.
To your point, one thing I want to mention is that one of the things I struggled with in the past is I've always wanted a diverse team of musicians and worship leaders. I want the team to grow. I love being on stage and leading worship, but the church is meant to grow. It's never meant to be about one person. And I would spend so much time trying to make perfect worship leaders, months of planning and scheduling. Hey, don't forget, in 3 months, you're leading worship. Let's make sure it's perfect. And then after that 3 months, they'd get on stage and it would be okay. And I would be so disappointed. They would be so disappointed and kind of like this, okay, I guess we'll try again. And one of those guys who, when I came to work, in Queens with you, one of those guys that was going to be a worship leader alongside me that quit, gave me one of the best pieces of advice ever. He said, instead of trying to plan for these big moments, have them lead every week. Have them lead every single week. And I thought to myself, well, how do I do that? And the way to get more one of the ways to get more worship leaders is by having music directors, because it's someone that they can lean on, that's used to the flow, that's used to making changes, that's used to making those call outs. They can focus outward and the music director focuses inward on the team. And it's this feeling of, I've had so many people tell me, oh, you scheduled Brett when I'm leading? Oh, thank God. It's a foundation of trust that is built over time that allows them just to do what they're passionate about. And as a new worship leader, not have to worry about turning around and giving, hey guys, let's play the 4 chord. They're going, oh, am I ever going to do that? No, focus on leading. We will take care of the rest. And we tell them all the time, do what you want. We will follow you. We are allowed to make mistakes, and a lot of times we don't. A lot of times we have we have moments where the Lord is honored and the Holy Spirit moves because we've given just even the smallest amount of leash for people to be able to roam around because they have someone supporting them behind them. I think that's great. I think it's needed, and I think that we as worship pastors and worship leaders, I'm speaking to myself and everybody else out there, all the dozens of people who are listening to this, the 1 dozen, that we take ourselves too seriously. We try to make everything perfect instead of making small incremental changes that allow people who aren't perfect to step in and be successful because they have the support they need.
Yep. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I don't think I have even anything to add to that. That's absolutely correct. Spot on.
Great. Podcast over. Let's go. Just kidding. So let's talk about that really quickly. Let's pretend you go to a new church, and someone looks at you and says, you've been a music director for years. Help us do that here. If you're looking at a church of any size, and they're wanting your help in developing out music directors in a worship setting, what do you do?
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess you have to assess what you're working with to start. You have to find kind of like the lowest common denominator, just in terms of like who are your people that are the most dedicated and what are their skill levels and what do they personally need? Because there's so many elements of it, right? It's like, do you build an in-ear system? Do you work on developing repertoire? Do you work on playing with Roman numerals? I think this is the best template that I can give anybody, but for starting anything anywhere is like you have somebody copy you until they can do it on their own. So if I was trying to train a worship leader or a musical director, I would be like, okay, you're playing today, but I'm also playing, and you're going to do very little and you're going to watch me the whole time. And then, maybe we'll split it. You'll do one song, I'll do one song. And then eventually they'll be able to take the lead. And there are so many skills that go into it, but it's like you can't really diagnose it or even make a good plan until you're in it. If you play a set with somebody, at the end of that set, what they know. Like, what they're capable of doing. So then you're able to say, this person needs help with this thing, and then you can actually help them. But if you try and, build something out ahead of time, I think it probably will not be super fruitful.
That's really good. That's really helpful. I think one thing I would add is that if you're listening and this is something you're passionate about doing, or something you think would be helpful in whatever your context is, you have to do it.
Right. Yes. Yep.
And I think that I cannot play the keys, but I can MD. I know what I want. And sometimes I can play other instruments. I play guitar, I sing, I play bass. I play bass. There are bass players and there's people who play bass. I play bass. Our friend Darren, our friend Honatan, our friend Kirby, they are bass players. Brett, you are a bass player. But when I step back, how did I grow our MD team? Well, Brett, we talked a lot about MD when you first started. When Chris came on, Chris can MD. Chris MDs. And when I step back and play bass, I don't go, man, I wish we had an MD. I do it. So a lot of times, I believe it starts with you. And then you're able to do all the things that, or maybe along with doing all the things you just said, Brett, it has to start with you as well. You have to be part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's all like leading from the inside, and it's all ties back to even like where we started, where it's just like, I think it's better to be clear and wrong and redirect later than to be unclear and unsure and then have nothing to redirect. Like if you're in it and you're doing it and you're learning and you give people, you're like, this is what we're doing, and it turns out to be a total flop, and then at least you can acknowledge the flop and make a new plan. But yeah, where you're saying like they need to be in it. Yeah, they need to be in it so that they can experience what works and what doesn't work and why. And if they're able to put themselves forward and be bold and brave in that, then everybody else will follow. Or like for a long time you were, and I think you still are, but I think it's become very nuanced. For a long time you were all about, we want to be clear leaders, which you still say this. But now you say it in 400 different ways so that everybody understands what you're talking about. That's exactly what it is. It's like, you've done things and then decided to do something else before, and everybody can follow you when you're leading, not even leading worship. When you're leading the team is able to follow you because you just say, this is what we are doing. And so then we don't have to worry about what we're doing. And then if you change directions, it's very easy to follow. So being the person who is the one who just does it, like that's actually the most helpful thing you could do for your team, because you're giving them safety and support to grow. Like that's what it means to care for people that you're leading. You're in it with them and you're saying, this is what we're doing, because they're not supposed to be, or they didn't ask to carry that responsibility. You're making a safe place for them.
I think one way to sum up part of what you said is clear, not clever. It's great to be clever. It's better to be clear. Clear, not clever. But let's talk about following a little bit. You brought it up, following the leader. You as an MD are a leader. What are some things you look for? I'm talking practical, in the moment. You have been looking at my butt as a musician for years.
Yeah. Yes, it's true.
Very rarely are you beside me. The keys are almost always off to the side. And I've literally had drummers tell me, well, yeah, I know when you tap this leg, we really need to drive it. What are things, either physically or just like, what are some ways you're able to follow worship leaders?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to answer that question, but just know that as I'm answering it, everything comes with time. So if you're listening to this and you're like, wow, that's really obscure. We're almost, we're 9 years in right now. So it's been a long time. So you start to know.
Yeah.
So the easiest thing, the most surface level, is when Patrick lifts his guitar up. I know that whatever we're going to do is about to end. Usually, like if you lift the neck of your guitar up, you're telling the drummer that he's about to stop playing. So I would say that's the easiest one. Like first time you're on stage, everybody reads that body language and knows what's about to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Then there are certain things that you tend to end phrases with. Like you have like an oh thing that you do at the end of a phrase. And when I hear that, I know that we're about to land on the one chord and wait there to see what happens next. There's like a thing you do at the end of your line with your voice, and when I hear it, I'm like, well, section's over. And so that's like a very audible cue, but after hearing you do it so many times, I know when that happens, that's where we're coming. I think also like you tend to get a little bit less relaxed towards the end of a section. I don't know that other people would pick it up, but like when you're in the middle of the song, there's like a certain stability to the way that you're standing. And when you get to the end of a phrase, I'll see you start to maybe fidget a little bit. Fidget's probably the wrong word. I don't even know if anybody else would see this, but like you physically stand different. So I know something is about to change. So my eyes are up to look at what you're going to do next. The other thing too,
can I interrupt?
I'm not reading.
Oh,
please.
Sorry.
Please.
Continue.
Oh,
no. Continue.
The other
continue.
thing is I kind of know what your 10 fallback songs are. So like, so some of it
that's
is
great.
Yeah, some of it is not like I'm reading your body. It's just I'm like, okay, Patrick is about to sing, the chorus or the bridge to What a Beautiful Name. Like here, it's coming, guys. It's about to happen. For a while, you would go into How Great Is Our God. Here For You is one of them that happens often. And so like kind of knowing Patrick tends to do this in situations like this. It's actually not a bad thing. Like it's really helpful. And people do fall into patterns. And so if you look for them, that will help you read what's going on.
I think you also just showed my age by mentioning the songs that I used to or currently default to, because they're all like 14 or 20 years old. You're like, yeah, Patrick's about to go into Jesus Loves Me. So guys, let's bring it down to the one chord. Patrick's about to sing The Old Rugged Cross from the hymnal. So let's all bring it. We're going to start on the 6 here, guys. I think that's really helpful to talk about how I was hoping for to be honest, like a more general, like, here's how I follow. But you talked about specific mannerisms that I never knew I did. So now I'm going to go lead worship on Sunday and be like, well, I hope my body's rigid enough for Brett to follow me at the end here. But I think that there are some things you can preemptively do. For instance, and let me give you, we've already talked about this. So like, let me give you just a really great example. So if I turn to Brett and I want to land a song, I just hold up my one, I say one, and he goes, and he leans into the mic and goes, one chord. Or the team sees it and they do it. So ahead of time, we've said, if I'm holding up one for, that's what those chords mean. But then you get to like, what if I want to play a very common chord, the 6 chord? What do I do? And I saw this really great worship leader, Kevin Singleton, say, this is my 6. And if you're watching, you can see me doing it. But if you're listening, it's like the hang 10 sign, like, or surfs up or whatever. He's like, this is my 6. From that moment, I looked at Brett and said, this is my 6. You'll see worship leaders, kind of like curve their hand, making it look like a bridge. This is the bridge. You'll see worship leaders hold up a C, and obviously that means chorus. And the guitar neck thing, the thing I say to especially drummers, I say, if we're doing nothing and I lift the neck of my guitar, we're about to do something. If we're doing something and I lift my guitar, that means we're about to do nothing. It's the start, stop. So I think having those, it may seem silly or simple, but having those conversations ahead of time are so helpful. So let me ask you this. How do you correct team members?
It's good.
You're either I've heard you do this mostly in rehearsal, but even live, we all have done this. We are not gelling with the team. We are in our own world doing something great musically but it's either incorrect or doesn't fit. How do you correct a team member?
So my general go-to is that I ask for what I want, but I don't talk about what they were currently doing. So, it's just kind of like, I'm so glad they're there. Everybody that we play with can play well enough to play well. And so they made a choice I don't like, and it's my opinion, and has literally nothing to do with them at all. So I just make it as impersonal as possible, and I just say, hey, can you do this there? Let's take that back one more time. And then it's over so fast. Yeah, that's how I do it.
There's a great confidence in that. And as a worship leader, I would say having a conversation with your team where it's understood that the music director is allowed to do that is important. Again, don't impress them with how clever your MD is. Have a clear conversation about what the MD is allowed to do. That's really good. Not saying, oh, don't do that, but more saying what you want. Any musician will pick up on the fact, oh, they want this. They want this. They don't want what I'm doing. But it's still, you don't want to embarrass anybody, especially a team of volunteers. That's really, really good. What do you do when you have no idea what the worship leader is doing?
If I'm completely lost, I pull my piano patch down and I hold a pad on the one chord without any, opinionated notes. And I just wait until my ears tell me what we're going to do.
Help me. Is opinionated notes a musical term or a Brett term?
I guess I made opinionated notes up. But like, if you don't know what's happening, you don't want to play a note that's going to imply that you're playing a chord.
I am using that forever.
Great.
But how do you communicate? So less as a musician, more as the MD, when you don't know the direction that the worship leader is going, how do you lead your team? What do you do?
I just say, wait. Because something is going to happen. Here's the thing. You're not, and this might be different depending on where you go, but like, you're not going to pull out something that's outside of my ability to hear. Like you're not going to be, modulating or playing something crazy. And not every church is different. So maybe you're playing a genre of music that like, yeah, your ears need to be really, really great. But like for what we're doing, I will know what you're playing. I just need a 15-second sample of the song. And as the worship leader, when you know your band is not with you, you're going to start making adjustments to bring the band with you. You're going to turn to the side so I can see your hand on the guitar, or you're going to throw me a cymbal, or you're going to be like, actually, this song is way too complicated to bring the band with me. I'm over here now. So it goes, it goes in both directions. I think you said this once, right? Like if the band isn't with you, you can, change your mind, or you can go by yourself. I forget. You used to say this all the time. Like, what do you do when the band isn't with you? You can tell them to stop playing and take it there by yourself, or you can make a different plan. I forget. You used to have something clever.
No, it wasn't clever. It was mean. I would say, if you don't know it, don't play it.
Oh, yeah.
Which is very clear, very clear. And I think it needs to be said, you've been in a worship service where a musician clearly is trying to learn a song live. And to that musician, I say, just don't play it. And we're not talking about a rehearsed song. We're talking about something that just kind of came to the brain, came from the heart, is rolling off the tongue. And me, if I'm playing bass and someone begins to sing a song that I don't know, boom. Mm-hmm. And I worship. Yeah. If you don't know it, don't play it. I think that's good. I've also heard you say to the team, I've experienced this live where Brett does hold the one chord, doesn't play any opinionated notes, and then just leans into the mic and says, this is going to be just Patrick for a bit.
Yeah.
And that's fine. And everybody kind of, and I think you need to practice those moments. It's okay to practice, it's okay to practice those moments. I think that's really good, and I think that's really helpful. It's really good to try those things in rehearsal. I think that's good, and those are some things we've done. So I want to begin to wrap up with a couple of questions. Actually, two or three questions here that I really want you to kind of take some time to think and help us help you. What is something, just in your experience, I know you're only one person, that you wish worship leaders knew about your role?
Oh,
like what is something that is misunderstood, or something that is even a struggle, or something funny? I mean, whatever. What is something you wish worship leaders knew?
Oh man, it's such a good question. Well, okay. Most of our worship leaders get it. So I'm like, I haven't been like, oh, you should know this. I guess there are two things super specific. One is that although I am not a singer, if being a singer didn't matter, I could lead the set. Not well, because I don't sing, but I could lead the entire worship set. And I want them to know that, not because like I care that they know that. I want them to know that because I want them to have that level of trust that if they got off the stage and left, the music would keep going and we would get through it. Like that you can lean, and it depends on the person, but you can lean on your MD that much. That would never happen because I have a talkback mic. I'm not a singer. And so like, I'm not going to lead a worship set, but the level of preparedness is to the level where I could get us through the entire set. And then the other thing is that the reason that I'm there is to support them. So whereas like I'm going to have some thoughts and opinions about what should happen, like I am always going to take the posture of saying what you want is more important right now. So like with the like same security that like I could get us all the way through the set without their help, they should also have the security of whatever makes sense for them leading is what we're going to do, because my entire purpose is to make them be able to lead easier. And it's not about me. And so like what they think, unless they're just like wrong, like this is going to make the band sound very bad, what they think matters more. So yeah, having kind of both sides of that security is the thing I wish they would know.
That's really helpful. That's really, really helpful. What is something that, actually, I want to marinate on that for just a second, that both of the things you wish worship leaders knew about your role was helpful to them, is that you are you wish, I would sum it up in, I'm here for this. I'm here for the whole thing. I agree with what success looks like, and I want to see it come to fruition. That's such a humble, that is the role. That is a humble, Christ-like answer. Thank you. And I would just want to encourage you. I know that.
I know that you do. By the way, the reason I feel that way is because you did such unbelievable work with me directly when you were building this team. Like the skills that I have now come because of the training that you did with me. And I had other skills. I had a good foundation, but this skill came because of you working with me on this skill. So thank you for that.
What I want to do is like, we could just go back and forth complimenting each other, but like, let's actually talk about that. This is skill.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is like the things we're talking about can be caught. They can just naturally kind of come to you, but they can be taught as well. And yeah, we spent a lot of time talking about practical things. As we, early on, you and I, we had like a discipler relationship
for years.
I would say now, I'm the worship pastor at your church. But I see us, growing more as, like working side by side more now. And it's such an encouraging thing. You know, like there was a time where I had a couple of kids, you weren't even married, which doesn't make me better. It's just a different phase of life. Now we're both dads, we're both husbands, which I'd like to go on record for the internet to say, I mean, if we're rating husbandry, I mean, you and I, 10 out of 10 for sure. I mean, it's recorded for history on this podcast. I don't think we can argue with that now.
Absolutely.
But anyway, so these skills can be taught. I think that's important. What is something that it feels like we talked so much like about how you help the team, how you help the room, how you serve worship leaders? What's something, maybe a few things or one or two things that worship leaders do that helps you?
Oh, man, clarity. Like the number one thing that makes working with a worship leader easy is they just tell you what they want to do. So just like a concrete example, like, you know, an experienced worship leader is leading when, do you hear that? Great.
No.
Okay,
What is it?
fantastic. You know, there's like currently some like very impressive Latin music being played outside my window, which is, 2 feet from my microphone. But if you can't hear it, that's great.
Heck yes.
Great. An experienced worship leader doesn't finish a sentence in order to tell people what's coming next. And an inexperienced worship leader finishes the sentence and tries to squeeze it all in, and everybody's like, what?
We have talked about this ad nauseum for years.
Yeah. But that to me, like, any of the 15 ways that could flesh out differently, it all comes down to, when you're leading, tell people what you want early enough for them to do it. And they will. So that's, I'm like, that's the most helpful thing you can do. Not just for me, for everybody, but certainly for me.
Let me play this out. So we're singing What a Beautiful Name It Is.
Yeah.
So, what a beautiful name it is. What a beautiful name. This is the wrong way to do what you just expressed. What a beautiful name it is. What a beautiful name it is. What a beautiful name it is. The name of Jesus. Sing it with me. The name of Jesus Christ, my Lord. Jesus Christ. And you have these worship leaders who, they're not foolish. They're learning. And they don't trust the knowledge of the people. The lyrics are behind you, buddy. And better leadership is, what a beautiful name. Let's sing that again. What a beautiful name. What a beautiful. I'm going to just let the people continue to sing as I lead them. Now, I don't want to say a paragraph there. What up? If you're struggling with sin and you need to repent, we can continue to sing this chorus. What a beautiful. That's not what I'm saying. But you're essentially saying, let the crowd finish singing as you lead into the next thing. It's more important for you to lead than for you to finish the line. It's one of the most practical worship leading tips you can give someone. It's always helpful.
I think this might be helpful. There's like a history of call and response in church culture. And so, we're talking about something super practical here, but the like liturgical element of call and response leadership is actually something that's like caked into the DNA of leading. So it's like, it feels counterintuitive because most worship leaders have been singers first. Right?
Yeah.
But if you think about singing from like a liturgical leadership standpoint, well, like, how many, more traditional church services have you gone to where there is a literal call and response between somebody standing in the front of a room? It's the same thing. It just maybe a different way to think about it,
Man, I'm sorry. You've caught me off guard with that point because it's so good. There's a history in the church of call and response. There's something liturgical to it. There's history there. It's why it works so well. It's, the cynical way I might say that is There's nothing new under the sun. Stop trying. It's great. Creativity is great. God is making all things new. We make new things. It's wonderful. But a nod to the history when we talk about church history and you look at a church's Meet the Staff page of their website, one of the only roles that exists in the Bible is worship leader. Now, obviously that's way too reductive. But when you look at David building the temple, you don't find the pastor of experiences, which is a thing. We can't get into it. And I don't think it's bad. It's just not, and is it a need? In some contexts, absolutely. But there are worship leaders. And so to look at our history as this call and response history and taking that into, right now we're in 2023, man, that's really good. Sorry, I'm talking too much on this because you just really, that was a great point.
If you want to read a little bit about that, I think it's 1 Chronicles 15 and 16 when David becomes king and he basically is like, okay, guys, first thing that we're going to do is we're going to summon the worship leaders to establish 24/7 worship. And you can go back and read in Psalms some of the actual lyrics that were written during that time. I actually think, and this is, I know hopefully this is helpful, establishing a culture of worship makes it so that everything functioning underneath it really comes to life, because in the environment of worship, you have the prophetic people who begin to pray. Like in the environment of worship, you have scribes are a thing we don't talk about anymore, but there were people documenting what was happening. And we don't necessarily look at Psalms as the revival book, but David's elected king, the whole empire goes from poverty to riches in one generation. And his whole leadership is flipped on this premise of having a strong culture of worship. The need for pastors, I'm sure, rose up out of being in, the closest thing, Old Testament, God presence. People are changed and they go do different things because of that. So it really is the worship culture. I don't know. I hate to say most important thing, but if you are going to change one thing and you could deeply root worship, I think what you will find is that where there's a deep culture of worship, every other thing springs up. Because real worship is presence. So everything else, every other thing the church needs, I think starts to grow certainly more easily when that's the focus. So yeah, that's 1 Chronicles 15 and 16. It is wild. It is wild. So if you want some context for why that is, check that out. It's really cool.
I'm so glad. You started that by saying, I don't know if this will be helpful. You fool. That was so helpful. I love, you've heard me quote this before, but Dick Eastman has that book, Unceasing Worship, that I made you read at some point.
And
he
I
has
still
that
go
whole
back
quote.
and reread
He's
it, by the way.
Yeah. He has that whole quote. Well, I'm going to summarize, which he says, worship is more important than missions. Missions is important, but it's not eternal. Worship is eternal. When we get to heaven, there will not be missions. There will be worship. And all the missions pastors and missions teams right now are relax. You should read the book. This is a guy who is a missionary. And he's saying that, again, from the branches of missions, the branches of prayer teams, the branches of pastoral care are founded in worship of the Most High God. I want to ask one more question. I really want to end here. Yeah, we're going to end here. I think there's no better place to wrap up than right there. I think there are a dozen more questions we could ask, a dozen more things we could get into. But I think the main thing is you may hear this, you may watch this and think, ooh, not for me. And that's okay. It's perfectly fine. But if this is something that's piques your interest or something you've been looking to do, and we hope that this information has been really helpful, but get out there and try. All it took was for me and Brett, 9 years ago to just actually not 9 years ago. For a while, we did not function this way, but a few years ago, say, let's give this a try and see what happens. So be encouraged. Brett, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. This has been not just beneficial for the Undignified podcast, but there was a couple things you said in there for me that I was like, I didn't know that, or that was really helpful. So I'm so thankful you were here, man.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. It was fun.
Hey, man, have a great day. Thank you so much for chatting with us. I can't wait to do it again. You were a real encouragement today.
Yeah, thanks, man. Awesome.
Thank you so much for joining us. Links to everything you need can be found in the description. And as always, if you need to get a hold of us, you can shoot us an email at theundignifiedworship@gmail.com or follow us on Instagram @thisisundignifiedworship. We'll see you next time.